It's another day in paradise, and on a nice summer day, you decide to have a swim in the ocean. You take a long and deep breath and head under the waves. It's beautiful at first. The oceanic realm is unlike anything you have experienced on dry land. Curious, you decide to explore. You keep going and going, viewing everything you can in such a short period of time. And as you come up once again for air, you notice that your friends have become quiet. The ambience of nature has overtaken them, and they are also now transfixed. But you are still not satisfied, and do not want to make your way back to the boat or back to shore. So you decide to take one more plunge. However, in your excitement to satisfy your curiosity, you make a miscalculation. As you try to get your eyes to focus, you realize that there is nothing around you to focus on. There is no floor, there are no fish or other sea creatures for miles, and there are no walls. The only thing that is there is water, and a cold, empty, and endless abyss gazing right back at you. There is nothing more but yourself, the water, and the vast unknown. Like most people, I have been trying to figure out how to put into words the existential dread that comes over me when I think of something as simple and basic as the ocean. It is an immeasurable expanse which, despite the best efforts of modern science, remains one of the world's greatest mysteries. It is utterly infuriating that our knowledge of it is so minuscule and practically non existent, rivaling our knowledge of the moon and the planet Mars. Upon examining the raw data, 80% of this underwater abyss remains unexplored and unmapped to this very day. This drives home the gut wrenching realization that we are truly know next to nothing about what is down there. We know more about the surface of the planet Mars, a place that no human has ever once stepped foot on, than we do about the oceans that engulf the vast majority of our own planet. And to me, the lack of knowledge of this vast expanse and its implications are utterly horrifying. There is a reason it is called the Deep Blue, because it is incomprehensibly so. At 36,000 feet straight down, you could fit the entirety of Mount Everest inside of it and still have 7,000 feet left to spare. In theory, you could launch a jumbo jet off the ocean's deepest point and it would hardly make it surface level even at its cruising altitude. And if you were to stack the Empire State Building, which is 1,454 feet tall, you would need to stack 24 of them on top of each other to reach the surface level from its deepest point. And to try to make sense of this deep and vast abyss, we have the concept of thalassophobia, the fear of the ocean. And yet, what it exactly entails can be something different from person to person. One person might fear the ocean's gargantuan and seemingly endless size, while another person might fear nature's unforgiving wrath, and another person may fear becoming trapped inside of it, and another person may fear the things that are inside its depths that do not belong there: shipwrecks, crashed planes, and the remains of bygone civilizations. And another person might fear the unknown creatures that inhabit its depths. Creatures that are relegated to myth and legend are, in reality, very much real and waiting to be discovered. And another person may simply fear all of that which is unknown. Much of what we think of when it comes to the ocean are visuals that we can logically comprehend. Reference points like coral reefs, the sea floor, and even sea creatures that share this world with us help us paint a picture that is mentally coherent. However, when you tread off the beaten path and veer off the continental shelf that separates our world from theirs, there is nothing more than a vast abyss and a macrocosm that we may never fully explore. All across the internet, we can find troves of videos and footage that demonstrates the ocean's colossal scale. It is hard to put into words the fear I get watching professional divers like Jonathan Bird take a plunge into this unknown world, a world where the lines of adventure and danger become blurred, a world that is ripe for discovery and exploration, a world full of caves, valleys, entire underwater oceans, and the remnants of man made structures that are just simply waiting there until the end of time. Popular culture in the form of books, movies, television shows, video games, and so on have either deliberately or unintentionally placed thalassophobia, the fear of the ocean, in some way, shape, or form into the plot of the story. This is the most basic aspect of human nature. When we cannot collectively comprehend something, we mythologize it. This makes it more palatable and easier to understand. In the surreal realm of the ocean, the only place on Earth where fact meets fantasy is no exception to this. Cultures around the world have attempted to understand and explain what might be lurking down in the abyss, a location that many of us will never visit in our lifetime. Certain supposed ocean monsters, such as the Kraken, the gigantic octopus of maritime folklore, the Hydra, the three headed serpent monster of Greek legend, and the Leviathan, the massive sea serpent of the Bible, are just simply accepted as legitimate possibilities. They cannot be proven or disproven. These creatures fascinate us given our sheer inability to explore the habitat in which they may live, and the possibility of what could be leads to mesmerizing stories, but no matter how fantastical the stories are, as we will soon see, the truth is far more stranger than fiction. At around a depth of 3,000 feet, the ocean becomes cold, dark, and full of creatures inexplicable. Instead of the octopi, dolphins, and the vibrant ecosystems of coral reefs, we instead find species exhibiting bioluminescence, the ability to produce light from their own bodies, wielding foreboding teeth, and riddled with the curious of fiction, colossal size. When you look at photos of deep sea creatures, it is utterly difficult to establish a sense of scale. The colossal squid, for example, looks relatively unassuming until you are given a scale retrospective to a human. The oarfish appears like a minuscule eel until you realize that they can grow up to 36 feet long. Deep sea gigantism has created a plethora of real life monsters. Japanese spider crabs bearing 12-foot legs, deep sea isopods growing multiple feet in length, sea spiders up to nearly 2 feet long, anglerfish the size of humans, and big fin squid with tentacles extending upwards of 26 feet long, and so much more. For 90% of the ocean, sunlight is unable to penetrate. This fosters an environment in which life like this needs to adapt to survive. A region known as the Abyssal Plain makes up 70% of the entire seafloor as we know it. However, because of the lack of sunlight, plants and vegetation cannot thrive down there. This presents a natural conundrum, as the bottom of the food chain normally relies on plant life for satiation. And so this is where a phenomenon known as marine snow comes into play. It is made up of decomposed organisms from above. On top of that, fecal matter, sand, and the remains of dead fish. Most of the deep ocean flora and fauna, plants and animals, rely on this as their main source of food. Now, with that in mind, it would only make sense for these creatures to evolve by shrinking, as not only are they compressed by the sheer weight of the ocean, but are devoid of solid meals. But as you have seen, though, the reality is quite the opposite. Kepler's law states that the larger an organism's mass is, the more efficient its metabolic rate is. This results in massive and highly efficient sea life lurking within the ocean depths, waiting and grazing for their next meal. However, I must now state that these are mere speculations. as the phenomenon of abyssal gigantism is still being studied. This is because of the historical impossibility of exploring the deep ocean, with the technology to do so having only existed for the last 50 years. Much of how sea life survives down there is entirely unknown. Alongside this, it is believed that 91% of the ocean species have not even been discovered. This is also compounded with the extraordinary statistic that a majority of the deep blue has yet to be seen by human eyes. In fact, everything I have just described to you in this segment has fallen in the mere 9% of creatures we have seen. Now just imagine what we have yet to observe. I suppose that it goes without saying that the ocean is treacherous, but that has never slowed down those who are eager to explore it. There is an allure to underwater caves, blue holes, and ocean cliffsides that make for an experience that is utterly riveting and spiritually fulfilling. However, it is unfortunately too common for deep sea dives to go terribly wrong. One such case is the tragic tale of deep sea diver 22-year-old Yuri Lipsky, a prolific diver who successfully accomplished hundreds of deep sea dives. On the 28th of April 2000, he attempted to conquer the infamous Blue Hole in Dahab, Egypt. It is known as one of the most dangerous diving locations in the world. Traversing this environment is no small feat. One of its standout features is its underwater arch and a massive 170-foot tunnel resting 164 feet below the surface and extending 85 feet in length. Reports have indicated that the blue hole is deceptive. It appears to be much shorter than it actually is. When you manage to get down there, alongside this, it bears areas with strong down currents, making for a grueling experience. When inside, depth and oxygen monitoring are an absolute must. Yet, Yuri Lipsky, despite being fully aware of the risks involved with such a dive, he maintained optimism in his physical ability. At 5:03 p.m., Yuri Lipsky embarks into the depths. Contrary to standard procedure, he attempts this dive not in a group, but alone. For the first 2 minutes, he swims parallel to the surface until he is over the deepest part of the blue hole. He then begins his slow and controlled descent before he begins to release air from his BCD, or buoyancy compensation device, in the hopes of sinking faster. At this point, his oxygen regulator begins to work harder to give Yuri the increase in oxygen that he needs. This manifests in the form of wheezing. He is descending rapidly, more so than he realizes, and shortly after, the alarm for his dive monitor sounds, signaling that his depth is at a critical level. By the time his dive monitor does sound, he is at a depth of 270 feet, which presents a multitude of inconvenient truths. The oxygen in his tank is quickly becoming toxic. His buoyancy is dwindling, and an effect known as nitrogen necrosis is beginning to plague him, which is instilling a sensation of complete drunkenness. At 5:09 p.m., Yuri Lipsky reaches the bottom of the blue hole at a depth of 300 feet. He immediately begins to inflate his buoyancy compensation device. In theory, it will begin to fill with air and will help him slowly make his way back to the surface. However, it is entirely ineffective, as the immense weight of the ocean negates any semblance of buoyancy. This realization causes him to panic because the oxygen in his tank is now empty and he is now disoriented. Yuri Lipsky is now trapped and has nowhere to go. Yuri Lipsky met his demise in one of the most dangerous diving locations in the world. He embarked to set a personal record and to achieve a depth he had never seen before. The footage of his final dive is available to view on the internet, where it serves as a somber reminder of the grueling conditions of the deep blue and the dangers of ignoring them. However, since the incident, Yuri Lipskin's body was recovered and laid to rest. However, the same cannot be said for the multitude of others who have met the same fate. Online, you can find footage of divers discovering the remains of their colleagues with their gear still intact, and it's absolutely terrifying and haunting to think that if those specific divers did not dive in that specific spot, their remains may have never been found, forever confined to the pitch black crypt that is the deep sea. Humanity and the ocean have a rather bizarre relationship with death. Superstorms leveling entire cities, gargantuan waves rocking man's largest ships like a bath time toy, and rogue waves appearing seemingly out of nowhere, destroying the largest and seemingly safest of oil rigs in the blink of an eye. It is estimated that the remains of over 3 million shipwrecks litter the seafloor, with thousands upon thousands of massive man-made objects accompanying them. Much like the remains of divers, these submerged relics imply and indicate defeat and death, destroyed by the hand of an environment that we had attempted to conquer and now serve as an everlasting token of failure. It is interesting to note that there is a subset of thalassophobia, the fear of the ocean. It is called submechanophobia, that delves into the very specific fear of encountering man-made objects within the depths of the ocean. It is a primordial repulsion that is caused by the crippling uncanniness of an object that does not belong, compounded by the lack of any visibility to determine its true size. The photos and videos of the Titanic, of forgotten animatronics, of ancient relics, of massive anchors, of sunken airplanes, and the interior shipwrecks are now effectively fueling the rise of a newer and more recently discovered phobia, only made possible by the rise of cameras that are able to document them. But it is not always abandoned structures, though, that can cause submechanophobia. There are hundreds of videos of divers having close encounters with the massive fins of a ship's propellers that, had they been swimming any closer, would have torn them to shreds. I feel personally that the reason why submechanophobia exists is because of the total inability to see an object as it truly is. The human mind is hardwired to fill in the blanks, and with what could be, and we often go to the most horrifying of possible outcomes. On land, fog is used as a mood setter for the strange and mysterious. And in the darkest depths of the deep blue, we can see this idea at work too. And in conclusion, it is hard to find the words to summarize the fear of the deep in just a single documentary. There are so many ways that I could have taken it. Whether it is the fear of sea life, or its infinite size, or how dark it is, or how much we do not know about it, there is one thing that has and will always be true. The ocean is bloody horrifying. It is an unforgiving frontier which harbors some of the most harrowing life and environmental enigmas on the planet. It is and will always be one of the greatest mysteries of life. It is an entire world that we share and yet know little about, and the vast majority of the planet, and yet is completely uninhabitable by mankind. It is said that you become part of the food chain in the moment you enter the ocean. Yet contrary to how it is on land, in their world of darkness, in their vast abyss, mankind is nowhere near the top.